The Browns, they're putrid. They're the worst team in the NFL.
The season, the 2024 season is over.
Lamar Jackson can't win the playoffs. He'll win a third MVP, though, so that's great. Drew Sample is the most important piece of the Bengals offense next year.
Go Joe Burrow. He deserves to be MVP. I wish he was the Browns quarterback. Kind of mean that.
If you're looking for the most reactionary, silly, and unserious show on the internet, then you're home. Live from Hamilton, Ohio, it's Off the Bench by Chatterbox Sports on 1410 ESPN Radio.
All right, everybody, good morning and welcome in Off the Bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers. And all I could think about during that intro is just how wrong Casey was. The Browns, the worst team in the NFL. First of all, Casey, they are the second worst team in the National Football League. You know, the details matter. Details matter. Facts matter, Casey. I mean, come on, get your facts right. There you go. But we welcome you in Off the Bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers. Justin Kenner, Jacob Tissett, Elliot Rearing with you here. No Casey McAllister today. We're all working remote once again. And I think we'll be back in studio tomorrow. Is that the plan?
Fingers crossed. Barring anything new. I think the plan is to be in the studio tomorrow. I got a shovel. Get a path from my garage to the street after the show. But streets look good, at least around me. I walked down my cul-de-sac and looked around, and all the streets look all right. So hopefully back in the studio tomorrow.
I will say my driveway is no closer to being shoveled than it was yesterday. So I'm going to try my best. We have a car parked down below our driveway. So in case I have to take that one, I'm going to probably take that one. But we've tried to hire multiple snow plows, and nobody wants to come and do it. So that means we are stuck here. The family is, until somebody with a plow helps us out. So that's unfortunate. I'm not going to lie, that's unfortunate. There's just too much to shovel. And again, I hate to do this on the air, but our driveway has either gravel on one side and just a 400-foot road on the other side. So there's no way to actually shovel this thing. And we're all stuck here, but that's okay. Listen,
that's all right.
I like being stuck in the house. I like being stuck in the house a little bit.
Well, yesterday we had thousands and thousands of people tune into the show. We should have put out an SOS. We should have said, thousands of people that tuned in. Can anybody help Elliot to dig himself out of the house? But nonetheless, we appreciate you guys hanging out today. Like the show below. Help us grow the show. We appreciate that. Yesterday, reactionary. What did you guys call it, Jacob? The obituary show. The Bengals. Obituary?
the Bengals obituary. Yeah, a little earlier than we wanted to do it, but you got to do it. I mean, we did give Elliot, end of season awards. We gave out about a month and a half ago.
Yeah, we did. So our end of season was technically in late November, but right. But now it's officially over. There's no more hope. We've moved on to the 2025 season for sure.
Well, there you go. And of course, that means it's NFL draft talk time. Maybe not this exact second, but we're getting there when it's all said and done. Our friend Jason Fitz, Yahoo Sports, he's going to hang out with us coming up here around the corner. We'll chat with him about the Bengals close to the season, what's next for them this offseason. Of course, college football. Ohio State prepares to take on Texas coming up this Friday night, and then Notre Dame getting set to take on Penn State in their semifinal matchup. Mike Golick Jr., I chatted with him yesterday. We got him locked in for tomorrow's show, so that's pretty exciting. We got a busy week for you guys here this week. And again, now that we got to find a lot more stuff to talk about.
Yeah,
so,
right.
I guess that just means more college football. Darn, I know, right? But hey, with that being said, and I should have asked, we have the sounder, right? I know we're remote. We have the Elliot's headline sounder. We're ready to rock.
Wah, wah. We do not have the sounder. We do not have the sounder.
That's okay. It's okay. Well, because right now, before we get to our conversation with Jason Fitz, Yahoo Sports, we're going to send it to our guy Elliot for Elliot's headlines.
Oh,
look at that. Look at that.
That was pretty good. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie. There aren't a ton of headlines going around right now, but here's the good news. I'm going to read some NBA. I know Kenner loves the NBA, and then there is a couple NFL things. So we got a couple things here. The Bulls last night, they took care of the Spurs, 114-110. Kobe White, he puts Victor Wembanyama on a poster on a massive dunk last night. That was very cool to see if you saw it on the little highlight reel. The Grizzlies crushed the Mavericks 119-104. Grizzlies are having a very, very good year. Kyrie Irving is set to miss 1 to 2 weeks with a back injury. You have the Pacers. They beat the Nets 113-99. The Knicks, they lose to the Magic 103-94. Magic having an okay year. The Bucks, they're in the Jimmy Butler sweepstakes. They are up 128, or excuse me, they won 128-104 over the disgusting Raptors. No offense, but what a terrible, terrible season. The Pistons are 500 this year, 18-18. They won last night, 118-115 over the Trail Blazers. Those are your NBA scores. NFL news: the Bears, they are set to interview Mike McCarthy, or at least plan to talk with him, meet with him, which would be very, very funny. I would hope Mike McCarthy would be a Bear. That would be endless memes for our good friend Barstool Big Cat. No free ads.
They asked Jerry Jones about allowing Mike McCarthy while under contract to interview elsewhere, and he said, if you don't want to be in Dallas, we don't want you in Dallas. So he's going to give him the ability to interview elsewhere. And Jerry basically saying he'll learn how great Dallas is when he gets out of here and sees how other organizations are run. I'm not so sure other players have had that experience. I remember Dalton Schultz, as he went to Houston, talking about how fans would walk through the locker room and weight room while they were working out, and said it felt like a zoo. So I think a lot of people would probably rather not be in Dallas.
Nobody would want to.
Well,
you have the Chargers. They are. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, if he goes somewhere else and to find out how great Dallas is, I mean, would Chicago be?
Yeah,
would Chicago be that?
That's true.
Would the Bears be that? And Caleb Williams, obviously. Look, we've seen Mike McCarthy's offense with Dak Prescott. I mean, look, they went 13 wins for 3 straight years, or 12 wins, whatever it was, for 3 straight years. And, Dallas quietly put up some of the best offensive numbers over the last couple of seasons, this year excluded, of course. Mike McCarthy leads some very good, prolific offenses. He did it with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. Could he do it with Caleb Williams and the Bears? That would be interesting. I'm not saying Mike McCarthy's an underrated coach. He's definitely not overrated. I think he's properly rated. I think he's a good NFL coach. It'd be better than what the Bears have had as of late. We'll see if that happens or not. But there you go.
If you win a Super Bowl, you have my respect. That's the way I look at it. I don't care how long ago it was. If you had the ability to win a Super Bowl, you're good. Moving on, the Chargers, they are planning to add Ezekiel Elliott. Speaking of the Cowboys, I didn't even know Ezekiel Elliott was off the Cowboys. So I guess once the season ends, is that how that happens? Or is he released week 18?
They cut him following week 18, maybe right before week 18. I'm not quite sure how the timeline's set up, but so that he could go sign with a contender. They said that, Ezekiel Elliott, you've done a lot for Dallas. We're giving you the opportunity to sign with a contender. And he cleared waivers, and no one signed him until yet another injury happened to the Chargers backfield, and they needed a body. So Ezekiel Elliott gets lucky. It probably would have been one of the saddest midseason cuts to chase a contender of all time if he would have just sat on free agency and retired as a free agent. But lucky for him, playoff team needed a body, so he'll be playing playoff football with the Los Angeles Chargers.
Harbaugh always relying on the Buckeyes.
That's right. That's right.
Moving to Major League Baseball, the Oakland Athletics, they have re-signed Brent Rooker, 5 years, $60 million. This is a guy that I wanted. I wanted him to be a Red, and at the price tag that the Athletics got him, I don't know why we weren't in those conversations. Maybe we were, but I have a hard time believing that you couldn't afford 5 years, $60 million. That seems like a pretty fair deal to me. But nonetheless, the Reds got their guy, which is our next headline. Gavin Lux traded to the Reds for pretty much nothing. A recent draft pick and a compensatory pick. Is that how you say that?
That's right. Yeah.
So
is what it is. I think Gavin Lux is a name a lot of people recognize, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a little later in the show. But yeah, it's you trade nothing for a guy who's going to be on the Major League roster and probably play a good amount. So I think it's beneficial, but if it's the fix, I certainly won't be happy.
It can't be the only thing. Because right. And again, we'll talk about it later on in the show, but I'm hoping there's still more. Nick Kroll said that there's, quote, a little bit of wiggle room, which doesn't instill a lot of confidence in me. But, I'm not going to sit here and bash the Reds for getting a good baseball player when that's what I've asked for. So I think Jacob said beggars can't be choosers. We have been begging for years and years and years, and we'll continue to beg long after this signing. So it's fine, and we'll move on. I just wish the Reds would have. The Reds, the fact that they weren't I didn't hear one rumor, one report that they were in on Brent Rooker.
Brett Rooker was re-signed by the A's, so the Reds would have had to trade for him. He wasn't a free agent.
So I mean I wish that could have been an option, but it's not. So we'll move on.
All right, and there you go. And I'm assuming that wraps up Elliot's headlines.
There was one more headline. It's a little bit of smaller news, but it could ripple across all of football. The Seahawks fired Ryan Grubb, their offensive coordinator, former offensive coordinator at Washington. He was the offensive coordinator at Alabama for roughly 6 days after Kalen DeBoer took the job before Mike McDonald offered him the offensive coordinator job in Seattle. He was DeBoer's play caller at Washington, at Sioux Falls, and at Fresno State. So I think that's probably a guy that's going to be high on the list for Alabama if they do move off of Nick Sheridan, their current offensive coordinator, DeBoer to reunite with his guy Ryan Grubb, and they've had a lot of success before, so I know a lot of Alabama fans are really hopeful that he'll return to Tuscaloosa.
All right, and in other news, Joy Taylor. Oh no, we're not doing that. That's not part of headlines. It could be. It could. Elliot says no. Elliot says no. Elliot is my moral compass. Let's just put it that way. All right, this is Off the Bench. This is Off the Bench presented by United Dairy Farmers. Justin Kidder, Jacob Tissett, Elliot Rearing with you here. Let's talk Bengals. Let's talk NFL playoffs. Let's talk college football playoffs, Buckeyes, and more. Jason Fitz, Yahoo Sports. He joins us when we come back. More Off the Bench next. All right, and we are back. This is Off the Bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers. All of us remote today, of course. Most of us snowed in and trapped in our houses on this beautiful, wintry New Year's Tuesday morning, if you will. But we appreciate you guys hanging out with us yesterday. I talked a lot of Bengals. We're going to talk some Bengals coming up here now. College football playoffs, NFL playoffs. We'll have some Reds talk coming up for you around the corner. As you heard during Elliot's headlines, Gavin Lux, the newest Cincinnati Reds. We'll have the Reds Hot Stove League show for our listeners here in Dayton later on tonight. It was just announced that Matt McClain will be joining Tommy Thrall and the Cowboy, and Jim Day, I should say, on the Reds Hot Stove League show. And then Gavin Lux will join the guys as well. So we'll be able to hear from Gavin Lux later tonight right here on 1410 ESPN Radio. Let's talk a little Cincinnati Bengals, NFL playoffs, and more. We got Jason Fitz, Yahoo Sports, hanging out with us. Jason, first of all, I hope you had a great holiday break. I hope you had a great New Year, and I hope you're having a great start to your New Year as well. We appreciate your time. Welcome.
Yeah, heck yeah, man. Always happy to hang out. Always great. And sorry that the Bengals season went so weird. I would just – I know you haven't even asked me a question, but I will say this quickly about the Bengals. All the conversation about, oh, my God, I can't believe the season Burrow had, Jamar Chase had, and Hendrickson had, and there's no playoffs. I would just remind everybody, I'm a Raiders fan. I never hide that. It was a couple of years ago that Devontae Adams was like the number 3 wide receiver in the NFL. Josh Jacobs led the league in rushing, and Max Crosby was number 2 in sacks. And that Raiders team won 4 games. Like, this is not – or 6 games. Sorry, I don't want to discredit my favorite team. This is not unprecedented. Like, we have to remember that football is not about 3 guys. Football is about 53 guys. And if you don't have proper depth, you are going to lose more games than you win. Plus, that defense was trash. I just think everybody's, like, caught on this narrative without realizing it's a lot more common than you think to have a few great guys on a terrible football team.
Jason, we've talked about this last year. You know, when the Bengals finished 9-8, we felt the front office maybe took their foot off the gas a bit because, hey, they finished 9-8. They went 5-4 without Joe Burrow. Imagine how good this team's going to be when they get Joe Burrow back. And they weren't super aggressive in the offseason. They added a couple pieces. They had the cap space. They had plenty of money to go spend last offseason, and they spent some of it. no real aggressive moves. And I don't think anyone was complaining about that because I think me included felt like, yeah, they get Joe Burrow back. I think everything's going to be fine. That obviously wasn't the case. We were discussing and debating on the show last week that, if the Bengals do end up making the playoffs, that could almost be a bad thing because it bails out the front office. They feel like, see, we're not a bad team. We just played bad to start. I feel like, a silver lining here is missing the playoffs might be a good thing because that's rock bottom. If you're an organization that has a quarterback like Joe Burrow, a star receiver in Jamar Chase, and a guy like Trey Hendrickson and others, and you miss the playoffs, that's kind of a wake-up opportunity for that front office. I feel like this could be a positive. As wild as that sounds, missing the playoffs could be a positive. It hopefully might wake up that front office.
Yeah, I think part of this is also, to your point, when you're bad, the worst thing that can happen is you read the wrong thing out of some wins at the end of the year. And this is across the board. And we're seeing a bunch of teams right now say, hey, we're gonna stay the course. We have to remind ourselves that, at some point, bad teams are who they are throughout the course of the season. This September or October issue for the Bengals is not this year. This September issue is every year. So at some point, you got to look internally as an organization and say, what do we do differently? How do we pattern our training camp different? What do we have to do with practices differently? How do we have to impact something so that we win more games at the beginning of the year? And as a front office, I think you're 1,000% right. I had a feel coming into the season that the Bengals believed that all they had to do was just stay the course. T. Higgins coming back, that you've got one of the best quarterbacks in the world. You're going to be a great team. And instead, I honestly, I don't want to be too harsh here, but let's be real. This was a wasted season. And the years we've been talking together, brother, how many times have I told you, when you have Joe Burrow, you cannot waste Joe Burrow. And that's yet again this year what's happened. We have one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL that's actually capable of beating the Chiefs on any given Sunday, that's actually capable of beating Mahomes. And you didn't even get him the chance. So, yeah, I think you're right. Like, this is that moment where you have to have a tough look in the mirror. Like New Year's, everybody likes to have a tough look in the mirror for New Year's resolutions. The Bengals need to make a New Year's resolution that they are never going to waste a year of Joe Burrow again, no matter what it takes. And if you don't have the people in the building that you can have confidence that can accomplish that, you need different people in the building.
We talk about the notorious slow starts for the Bengals every season, and then they get hot, and then they take that momentum into the most important time of the season, which is obviously that December, early January stretch, giving you that momentum, hopefully heading into the postseason. That's not the case this year. Zach Taylor's an interesting character, and I know last time you were on with us, you said he's not the top half of the league. He's not the bottom half of the league. He's right there in the middle as far as how he's perceived as a head coach. But it was interesting. They played the Steelers last week, and this is another season where the Steelers are collapsing down the stretch. Mike Tomlin and the Steelers, especially in recent history, have just been known to have these epic collapses down the stretch after hot starts. The Bengals have these epic slow starts and then these major comebacks, these hot streaks to close out the season, and we've seen them ride them to a Super Bowl, ride it to back-to-back AFC championship games before. I know this sounds wild because if you ask any team who you want out there, you're going to pick Mike Tomlin over Zach Taylor. But when you put it that way, Zach Taylor, I went and looked, he's 18-4 in the month of December since 2021. You look at Mike Tomlin, and he's, 13-12, a game above 500, 5-game losing streak or 4-game losing streak, whatever it is to close out this month. This is a regular occurring pattern for Mike Tomlin-led teams. Zach Taylor-led teams get hot at the right time. Mike Tomlin-led teams seem to lose steam at the worst time. Who would you rather have leading your team when you look at those particular scenarios? It's always going to be Mike Tomlin, but Zach Taylor seems to push the right buttons at the right time when it's all said and done. Yeah,
so I think what's interesting about that is, to me, because you raise a really good question, and I'm not trying to dance around it, but and then I say but. What makes it interesting is that Tomlin has been playing with a bad hand. And I think, if you ever play poker, sometimes you can make the most out of the least when you're playing poker, right? And there are some guys that can do that often. And I think that that's what Tomlin has done so often. I mean, the way that Pickens has just become absolutely, he's more drama than he's worth on the field. And the fact is, they actually tried to convince us midway through the year that Russ wasn't washed. And now we're reminded, no, Russ actually is washed, right? Like, I think that it's tough in this league to win without a quarterback. And ever since there's been no Big Ben, it's just been piecemeal for the Steelers year in and year out. It's been piecemeal, and they haven't been able to find the right answer. Part of the difference here is that there's just not offensively, particularly. I don't think the Steelers belong where they are. I don't even think the Steelers, for most teams, I don't think if Zach Taylor was the coach of the Steelers, they'd be in the playoffs right now. It took a lot of work to get this team to where they are now. Tomlin's responsible for hiring inept offensive coordinators. Tomlin has some sort of a voice in the roster construction. We have to believe that as long as he's been around. So the drafting of guys like Kenny Pickett, like there's a reason that they've been bad there. But I do think that part of it is just the cards dealt to the Steelers. When you look at their roster, it's just not good enough. The Bengals, I think the reason it feels like such a disappointment is that the roster is good enough. And frankly, we see so often teams decide to devalue preseason, and the argument is that you need guys playing well in December. That's true, but you also need to play into January. If the Bengals had played the month of September with enough urgency to get one more win, they'd be in the playoffs. So I do think that that's part of why this feels like a disappointment. It doesn't necessarily feel like Zach Taylor is lifting up guys that don't belong there. It feels like Zach Taylor finally found the rhythm with the team that has enough talent to win.
I think that the Steelers, by far a better run organization than the Cincinnati Bengals, and they've been that for quite some time. I look at the Bengals now, and it's like back-to-back years of missing the playoffs. Last year, Joe Burrow was hurt. This year, you had a completely healthy Joe Burrow and 3 stat leaders in key categories. But now I feel like the pressure is starting to hit the organization in a way that it hasn't before. When the Bengals won that Super Bowl run, it was a miracle run. They were projected 6 wins, something like that. Nobody expected it, but now you have those expectations. So in terms of the 2025 season, where do you rank the Bengals in terms of highest expectations coming into the season?
I think what's interesting about the question is look at the benefit of the doubt we give certain teams, even in that division. Like the Ravens, no matter what happens with the Ravens are going to be favored next year because they're the Ravens. No matter what happens with the Steelers, even though they still won't have a quarterback, this is a terrible year to need a quarterback fix. Even though they won't have a quarterback, we're still going to say, well, Tomlin's never had a losing season, right? Like that's real for a reason. So you start thinking about expectations and the way they're stacked on. I guess the question becomes for Bengals fans, why should anyone believe that next year is going to be different? And that's the frustrating part of it, because what we're going to have to do when we go into next season is apply universal benefit of the doubt. So that means every move for all of these teams works out or doesn't work out. You can't apply it to some and not apply it to others. So if you start doing that, you look around and say, okay, well, what teams no longer really deserve that in general? Like the Browns are going to stink and they don't have an answer at quarterback. And this is a terrible year to need a quarterback. So the Browns, I don't have high expectations for next year, even though they have a coach that's been coach of the year twice, right? The Ravens are always going to get the benefit of the doubt because frankly, they've earned it, right? And the Steelers are always going to have a winning season. So where do the Bengals fall in that? Somewhere in the middle. And that's not good enough. That's the part of this. Like the Bengals told you when they went all in on keeping T. Higgins that they believed they were in a Super Bowl window because they didn't get anything back for him. They didn't try and move him. They were like, nope, we're going to run this thing back and it's going to be A-okay. And it wasn't. And so now a new defensive coordinator comes in. Finally on that. I'm shocked that move didn't happen a while ago. So now you're going to have a new defensive system, which sometimes takes a minute to get used to. And I think you need an overhaul on that side of the ball. You need a lot of new players on that side of the ball. So I think the expectations for the Bengals every year should be a Super Bowl because when you have Burrow, you should be a Super Bowl caliber team. But right now, I mean, if you're way too early 2025 pick, they're going to be, in my mind, competing for a wild card, which, again, if you don't have Burrow, that's great. You have Burrow, that's not good enough.
I agree with you. And, I go back and forth on addressing the defense, but the offense is still what makes this team hum. And and the crazy part is you don't have to have a top 15 defense. Like it has to be better than last. That's where I am when it comes to the offense and making moves this offseason. You mentioned T. Higgins. T. Higgins is a guy that I think needs to be back. And I don't know if Mike Brown's going to be able to pay that number, but the offense works so well with him here. We've seen what happens with Jermaine Burton. No disrespect, but he's probably at a casino playing slots right now. You have a guy like Yoshi who's okay, but he's not a top 3 pass catcher on this team. Mike Gesicki's the 3rd best pass catcher. T. Higgins inevitably will be at least put on the franchise tag next season. Our good friend Mike Florio, I think, put out a report that if the Bengals were to make the playoffs, T shouldn't play. It's too risky. Next year, would T. Higgins, in your mind, play on another franchise tag?
I don't think he's going to have a choice. I mean, players always say they won't play on it. They don't really have a choice, if we're being real. And this is where next year everybody's going to scream, why don't they get rid of the franchise tag? Players are going to scream that. I will remind everybody, they don't get rid of the franchise tag because it only impacts 32 players a year max. That's the most it can impact. You can't collectively bargain something for thousands of NFL players. There's over 2,000 players in the league. They're not going to vote to give something up as an entire base just to get rid of the franchise tag for 32 players. So the franchise tag's here for a reason. T doesn't really have any power. The argument, though, that you just made that they can't sign him, I would just say that the biggest kick in the no-no places to the entire NFL to that argument is Howie Roseman and the Eagles. Because here's what we learned from Howie Roseman. They go in early on contracts. They go in big on contracts. They get guys paid, and they're able to pay a bunch of players. There is a way to do it. And for every team that sits there and says, well, you can't pay your quarterback and pay your receivers, yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. You got to draft incredibly well. You got to make sure once you start paying guys, you got to make sure that you draft incredibly well. But if the concept is we can't pay Jamar, T, and Joe Burrow, the Eagles are looking over here with an evil maniacal laugh saying, guys, we already did that. We did that in our version of it all the way across the board. And guess what? We're the number 2 seed in the NFC and projected to be a Super Bowl favorite, right? Like, so if you're the Bengals, find a way to get it done. I know that's oversimplification, but find a way to get it done. I agree with you, by the way. They need Jamar, they need T, and it means they're going to have to pay 2 guys like a number 1 on top of Burrow. That's going to be difficult to do, but that's where you better trust your organization to draft well. You got to hit home runs every year, and then on top of that, you got to keep guys in the building that are worth keeping. It makes no sense for them to let T. Higgins walk in my mind. They're not going to find better than T. Higgins in this year's draft for a reason. Like, certain guys are special, pay him, and then if you want to figure out T. Higgins, how to replace him in 3 or 4 years, worry about it then.
You mentioned how important it is to draft when you're paying some of those guys that big money, and the Bengals have swung and missed or failed at development of a couple guys more than a couple guys in the last few years, and I think that's part of what led to Lou Anarumo's firing. But with that defensive coordinator job open, I know Trey Hendrickson's great, not a lot of stars on that side of the football, but with Joe Burrow and how good this offense is and how low the bar is for that defense to play in order to win a Super Bowl, how attractive do you think this defensive coordinator opening is on the open market in the NFL?
Oh, huge. The defensive coordinator job here is as long as the Bengals are willing to pay the money and the term and I only say that because we got to understand certain teams, and I don't know the Bengals inner workings to this level, but certain teams will only give coordinators 2-year deals. They won't give 3-year deals. That's part of why Cliff Kingsbury turned down the Bears and the Raiders and ended up with the Commanders instead, right? Like wanted more money and wanted more time. So you got to pay the money that you want to pay. But yeah, how appealing is this job? Wildly appealing. And then the other side of it is, because from a defensive coordinator standpoint, you got an offense that's going to save you over and over and over again, and you got one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. So in this year's draft, which has some, there's some depth issues in this year's draft, are they in a situation where they can get some more defensive line help? The first thing I'd be looking at as a defensive coordinator is, okay, if we're throwing the ball as much as we're throwing it, we're scoring the way we're going to score. We know the other team's going to throw a bunch against us. If that's the case, let's make sure that we can absolutely hammer the quarterback every single drop back. And you have one of the biggest pieces in the league to be able to do that. So, yeah, I'm assigning draft assets to the defensive line to help, essentially attack the quarterback, even if that means the back end of my defense is a little bit suspect. And I'm relying on a coordinator that can be clever in schemes to bring blitzes from everywhere. I think it's anytime you have a quarterback in an organization, you are going to win a bunch of football games, and that's how you elevate in the NFL. So, yeah, I think it's wildly appealing.
The names I've circled, because I absolutely agree. I think it's incredibly appealing. I want one of the ex-head coaches, Dennis Allen, Robert Saleh, Matt Eberflus, even after how it went poorly in Chicago, but he was a good DC in Indianapolis. Al Golden, the current Notre Dame DC, ex-Bengals linebackers coach, a reunion there could be interesting as well. Are there any sneaky names that fans might be missing to replace Lou Anarumo as the defensive coordinator of this team for next season?
I like that Al Golden name a lot, by the way. I think that's a really good – and you look at that Notre Dame defense – look at over the course of the year. Yes, they have the most inexcusable loss in all of college football this year. But look at the way they just attack the football. It's pretty wild to see. Even in the secondary, they close windows so quickly. That Al Golden call is a great one. And I don't think it's the worst. If you get a former head coach, one thing I like a lot about a former head coach coming in is there's a lot of support in that process, right? Like guys that have been there and know they're going to get back there. Somebody like Dennis Allen, a good idea too, because the DA's had 2 jobs. He's not going to get a third. Right. So one thing in my mind. So you're bringing in somebody that's going to be with you for a minute. Continuity, y'all. Like, look at the two teams right now in the NFL that are absolutely hammering everybody, the Chiefs and the Lions, right? Now, the Lions have been able to keep their coordinators together. We'll see what happens this offseason. That could change drastically. But one thing I think makes the Chiefs absolutely unbeatable is part of the reason you have to beat Kansas City week in and week out is you got to beat the best head coach, the best quarterback, and arguably the best defensive coordinator. And Spags hasn't gotten a sniff from anybody. So, look at Minnesota. Minnesota, I don't believe Brian Flores, because of his lawsuit against the NFL, is really going to get any real looks this year. So the Vikings are looking at it saying, we got one of the best head coaches in the league. We got a quarterback that we trust. And, by the way, we've got a defensive coordinator that can absolutely hammer anybody. Like, keeping your coordinators is a big deal. So I love the idea of somebody like DA that's been in a couple spots. He's really good on the defensive side of the ball. Everybody says he's better as a coordinator than a head coach, and he's not going to leave you in a year when things go well.
Absolutely. I think the continuity is definitely a big piece. But now shifting gears from the Bengals over to the college football playoff. When you were here last on Off the Bench, you predicted that the first round of the playoff were going to be blowouts across the board, and the favorites were going to take care of business. So first and foremost, kudos to you. Want to give you your props for a correct prediction there. And the second round really followed somewhat of the same formula. A lot of people expected Ohio State and Oregon to be a great game. Ohio State jumped out early and took a big lead. Arizona State clawed back and gave us an overtime thriller, but Texas even controlled that one early. Both favorites moving on. Do you expect these next two rounds to give us some college football classics or be a little bit more like the first couple rounds of the playoff?
I think we get one classic. Look, let's call it a close game.
Okay.
Penn State, Notre Dame. Penn State, Notre Dame is not going to be pretty football. It's going to be ugly football, but it is going to be a great game, I think. That's one that I look at and say, okay, Riley Leonard was forced to be one-dimensional in the playoff game against Georgia. I think we kind of expected that, but some of those runs were absolutely key. That's the way Notre Dame runs their offense. Like, they know that they can get rushing yards from their quarterback and their running backs. They'll take the passing yardage they can get when they get it. And Penn State is really, Tyler Warren and what else? I wish for Penn State's sake they had some better weapons on the outside to see more of Drew Aller in this process. But I'm genuinely curious if Penn State goes back to the Big Ten approach and just hammers the football and tries to run. Because you can run a little bit on this Notre Dame defense. They've have some depth issues with injuries on the defensive line. I think this game is that's the game where it's two teams just knocking the snot out of each other with a low, like, I'm hammering the under on it. This feels like which quarterback makes the mistake first. So I think that's the better game. Ohio State, like, this is wild, y'all. Like, Chip Kelly's changes in this offense since the Michigan game, I think, are wildly important here. The way they're moving the pocket, they're doing like half rollouts, as they call them. So the quarterback starts the rollout and then positions himself to throw the ball. They're also doing full rollouts for Will Howard. They've been putting Will Howard in situations where he gets better space to throw the football. And by doing that, they're actually getting the ball to their weapons. And then you have to account for their weapons. And one of the best teams running the football just then runs the ball down your throat because you don't have extra defenders in the box. You can't afford to do that. So I think Chip Kelly unlocking the offense is one of the craziest stories of this playoff. And the way they've done it, man, I do not trust. Quinn Ewers is good for an interception a game. That doesn't make any sense. Quinn Ewers has not been himself since he hurt his shoulder early in this year. I'm surprised they didn't bench Quinn in the game against Arizona State because he was getting attacked so much to put in Arch because Arch is more mobile. I have a hard time seeing where Texas is going to get points if Ohio State keeps playing this way. So I think Ohio State has a chance to actually roll in this game. The impressiveness of Ohio State is one of the best stories in this entire college football playoff.
Jason Fitz from Yahoo Sports, nice enough to join us this morning. And Ohio State, through the first two rounds, like you just said, looking about as dominant as they come. They look like the team a lot of people expected coming into this year. And I hated the Michigan loss as much as every other Ohio State fan, but it might have been the best thing to happen to this team. It's forced a marriage of Ryan Day's passing game and Chip Kelly's run game. And this is exactly why fans were so frustrated with the regular season, because we knew this was in there for Ohio State. Are they as good as they look? Are they as dominant as they look? Or is this two lucky games and we could be falling short of a national championship this season?
No, I mean, I think they beat the toughest opponent in the first round and they knocked the snot out of them. That Tennessee defensive line is legit.
Yeah.
And they didn't look legit in that game. And then they went into an Oregon game where Oregon has found a way to win every single time. And they made Dylan Gabriel look silly. I mean, the defensive line for Ohio State, the way they got after Oregon wasn't ready for that. They weren't ready to be punched that hard. They weren't ready for the speed, which is amazing to me because they'd seen it before. So I think there's no way to discredit the wins we got here. And I know this is a tough message for Ohio State fans, but I've been saying it over and over again. Michigan doesn't matter. Like, Michigan's irrelevant. Just like if Auburn tries to go out and trash talk Alabama in a year that Alabama wins the national championship because Auburn won the Iron Bowl, we'd be mocking Auburn fans everywhere. Let's just get it clear here. Michigan does not matter. And the way they looked against Michigan doesn't matter. They don't raise banners for the Michigan game. They don't make Sports Illustrated memorabilia for the Michigan game. They do those things for national championships. So if I'm Ohio State and I'm Ryan Day, I no longer care about the Michigan game. And that's a tough message for Ohio State fans because even my friends that are Ohio State fans are like, maybe if we win a natty, I'll almost forgive Michigan. I just got to keep telling y'all, like, it doesn't matter. What happened in the Michigan game now is irrelevant because this Ohio State team has woken up and they are so explosive while still having two of the best backs in the country. My God. And let's not get this twisted, too. Look at the 2 games that Texas lost. Texas, the 2 games that they lost recently, or didn't lose, I should say. Arizona State, they almost lost. And the SEC championship game, they lost. The common thread in those 2 games, they couldn't run the football at all. So if I'm Ohio State, I know I can make Texas one-dimensional. All I got to do is take away the run. They averaged less than 2 yards a rush in the SEC championship game and against Arizona State. Arizona State is not nearly what Ohio State is. That's why I think this game can get out of hand, because if you make Texas one-dimensional, you're going to kill them. I wouldn't be surprised to see a significant double-digit win by Ohio State in this game.
I saw some people pointing to a 6-point spread, saying it's a lot for a semifinal game. I thought it was incredibly respectful to Texas with how Ohio State has looked so far. But shifting to the other semifinal game, Penn State and Notre Dame, 2 coaches that have fallen short in big games most of their career. Notre Dame, as a brand, has struggled in New Year's Six Bowls, picking up their first ever win over Georgia last round. And obviously we know the James Franklin story against ranked opponents. He's obviously gotten them further in the playoff now with a couple wins, and that means a lot. But playing SMU and Boise State, I don't think that's changed the narrative around him. Who has more pressure on them in this game from a coaching standpoint?
Franklin, for sure. Because if you're Notre Dame and you're Marcus Freeman, you did just beat Georgia, right? And you've gone in and you've won 2 significant playoff games, and your team has looked so good in the process of doing it. I think that completely takes the monkey off of the back for Marcus Freeman for right now. If they lose in this game, it's still going to be, when we come into the playoffs next year, the number they're going to put up on the screen is Marcus Freeman is 2-1 in playoffs, right? Like, that's what they're going to do. And his playoff record is going to be just fine. So Marcus Freeman's fine. The unfortunate thing, and I do mean unfortunate, because James Franklin has also won 2 playoff games. I know that it was against SMU, who didn't really belong, and I know it's against Boise State, who's group of 5, but my God, he's won 2 playoff games. And we're still going to find a reason if he loses this game to say, can't win the big game. The problem with that narrative is, like, this matchup is a coin flip. So if you tell me that James Franklin specifically loses this game for them because he seems like he's outclassed, outcoached, the only thing I'd say is Marcus Freeman just outcoached Kirby Smart. And I don't think that means Kirby Smart can't coach, right? Like, Marcus Freeman in that last game significantly, not just with the punt, the fake punt that turned into the play that, was brilliantly run, but throughout the course of the game, situational football, Freeman outcoached Kirby Smart. So does that mean that Kirby Smart's a bum? No. I think we need to understand that just because James Franklin has had past difficulties, I don't think that applies to this playoff. I don't think there should be pressure, but Penn State fans don't want to hear that. There is pressure.
All right, good stuff. Jason Fitz, Yahoo Sports, awesome enough to give us some time here today. This is Off the Bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers. Justin Kinner, Elliot Rearing, Jacob Tissa with you here. Jason, we appreciate you as always. On the way out, though, obviously, you talked about the quarterback class of the draft coming up. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. My Browns have the number 2 pick. Potentially Sanders at number 2. I know that the Titans possibly interested, obviously, in Cam Ward. Your Raiders going to trade up to try to get Sanders or Ward, or how is this all going to play out? Is Drew Aller going to end up changing his mind and entering the draft? What do the Browns do with that number 2 pick, do you think?
So I was very unpopular with Raiders fans last year when I said going into the draft that there was absolutely nothing that could be offered to the top 3 teams that would get them to trade down. And I turned out to be right on that, and that was simple math. I had some people tell me that one team offered Washington as much as 3 first-rounders and 2 second-rounders to move up for Jaden Daniels, and they wanted nothing to do with it. Same thing's going to happen this year. The top 2 teams both need quarterbacks, and even though I don't think either of these quarterbacks, like, frankly, as tough as it is to say this, I'm actually glad the Raiders found their way out of the top 2, because I don't think either of these 2 are as sure a thing as last year. The people I've talked to that I trust that scout really well on the quarterback position, when I've asked, where would Cam and Shador be ranked amongst last year's draft quarterback class? The answer I got from the 7 or 8 people I've asked, I've gotten around Bo Nix from every single one of them. Now, Bo's turned out to be pretty good this year. I'm not taking anything away from that, but this is not Jaden Daniels part 2 for anyone that's hoping for that. This isn't even Caleb Williams part 2. These are 2 quarterbacks that both have some serious questions. I think they will go 1-2 by the time the whole process is over. I think Shador has a lot of appeal to people. I actually prefer Cam a little bit to Shador, but I think they're both, in a normal draft, they'd both be picked in the low 20s. This isn't a normal draft. The Titans have to do something at the quarterback position. And the Browns, especially with the report now that, whatever we take of it, that the recovery has taken a step back for Deshaun, I think the Browns have no choice but to go. And this is the most affordable way to get another quarterback, which you're going to have to do at some point anyway. So I think both teams go 1-2. By the time it's said and done, I wouldn't be surprised if it flips. Shador goes 1, Cam goes 2. But I don't think there's anything that the Raiders or the Jets or anybody else or the Giants are going to be able to offer to move up. So everybody else is going to have to be happy sitting there saying, I will take the best pass rusher, the best, I would rather have out of this year's draft Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, any of the offensive linemen we're in love with. I'd rather have any of those players than these quarterbacks personally.
All right, good stuff. Jason Fitz, Yahoo Sports. Jason, you the man, sir. We appreciate you, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Appreciate you, boys.
All right, this is Off the Bench presented by United Dairy Farmers. Justin Kinner, Elliott Rearing, Jacob Tissett. We'll be back in just a moment. All right, and we are back. Justin Kinner, Jacob Tissa, Elliott Rearing with you here. This is Off the Bench presented by United Dairy Farmers. Shout out to Jason Fitz, Yahoo Sports. Appreciate him giving us some time. Covers NFL, covers college football, and he covered it all with us here. Just a few moments ago, we talked a lot about the Bengals. Of course, their season over, 9-8. The regular season has officially come to a close, and it's all playoffs moving forward. We'll talk more about the playoffs. A coworker of mine asked me earlier, like, "Oh, what playoff games are this weekend?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, the playoffs." My mind's on the draft, and what? Wow! I mean, come on! I mean, college football playoffs, but yeah, a lot of NFL playoff stuff we'll get to coming up around the corner. But appreciate Jason giving us some time. A lot of interesting takeaways there, obviously, especially in the Bengals side of the conversation. Elliott, you asked him about T. Higgins. I think the biggest question. Look, there's a lot of question marks with the Bengals heading into the offseason, and I feel like some of these talking points are going to be very similar to where we were a year ago at this time. What do the Bengals do with T. Higgins? I think a couple months ago we thought it was a for sure foregone conclusion. This is the final year of T in Cincinnati. That may not be the case. Have we seen the last of T in Cincinnati? Sounds like to Jason Fitz that may not be the case. Maybe not so much from things he's hearing, but the Bengals should not let another elite talent like T just walk out the door without trying to keep him.
Yeah, excuse me. I'll say this. I was a little shocked by his answer because from everything I've read, it's I guess it's just the national media. It's the tagline when a guy gets put on the tag, you just say he's going to sit out and he should sit out because he's risking all this money. And I think I've been brainwashed to believing that. T. Higgins has to be a Bengal. He has to be. Unless we're going to devote one of our top 2 picks on a wide receiver, I don't see a world where we can survive without T. Higgins. And you have so many other needs, like he said, especially defensively, that how much resources can you put into drafting a wide receiver when there's so many other positions that need help? You need guards. You need half the defensive roster needs to be fixed. You might need a kicker at some point. And there's so many things that have to be worked on. If you have a sure thing in T. Higgins, pay him. And I think the one big thing that we talk about here is Joe Burrow, he likes Zach Taylor. We can complain about Zach Taylor until Joe Burrow says he doesn't like Zach Taylor, and he keeps openly saying in these press conferences, I like Zach Taylor. We've never had a better relationship than we do right now. I think whatever Joe wants, he's going to get. And I know Reed has hesitation when it comes to that. Should your quarterback be able to control the whole franchise? No, but at the same time, he should have the biggest voice in the room because he's the most important piece of the puzzle. He wants T. Higgins back. Joe Burrow wants T. Higgins. He's been very, very vocal about it. Jamar Chase wants T. Higgins back. I think if you're the Cincinnati Bengals, you seriously consider paying T. Higgins what he's worth, on top of paying Jamar Chase a record-setting NFL contract. You have to at this point in my eyes. And I think next year, if you put him on the tag, he plays. I don't know. I think the Bengals are in a very, very good spot to at least be in that wild card fight, as Jason Fitz said. Whether or not that's the correct expectation heading into next year, that's the reality of our situation right now. Until we know our defense can play at a somewhat high level, we will be begging for those final wild card spots. And the difference is between us and the Dolphins and the Broncos and the Chargers and whoever else is going to be fighting down there, we have the best quarterback out of that bunch. So I'd take that as long as we have T. Higgins.
Yeah, I think Joe Burrow's.
Jacob, let's just do a quick touch and go. Let's pick up with this because I do good points by Elliot. I want to get your take on this too. So just a quick touch and go. We'll step away for a few moments. Shout out to Elliot because he made the touch and go just a casual, it's just regular off the bench lingo now. We'll touch and go. We'll be right back. More off the bench, hour 2 when we come back. All right, and we are back. Justin Kinner, Jacob Tissett, Elliot Ruring with you here. Segment number 4, hour number 2 for our listeners in Dayton, of course. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us on the YouTube side. Chatterbox Sports on YouTube. This is Off the Bench. Give the show a like below. We appreciate that, of course. So the T. Higgins thing, we've spent so much time on that, but there's always new layers and wrinkles being added to it. And now that the offseason is officially here for the Bengals, that is something that is going to continue to be talked about. And Elliot, you talked about it, the Jason Fitz conversation. The one thing that I thought was interesting too about the franchise tag, you asked him, would T sit? Would he even be open to playing on the franchise tag? Obviously, he's been pursuing a long-term deal for a while. Wasn't completely pleased about the being put on the tag last year, but I think I think what he thought was what we all thought, that was a Super Bowl caliber roster, and he wanted to put that distraction off to the side and say, hey, if this is my last go-round in Cincinnati, let's go try to win a championship. I think if he knew then what he knows now, I don't know if he would have been as quiet about playing on the franchise tag. I mean, at one point did request a trade. Now he has new representation, so I think that matters too to a certain point. But if he's not as confident that this team is a Super Bowl contender, is he willing to accept that? That's going to be the big question. But as Jason Fitz said, guys, he has no leverage. He's going to play. They do the whole, trade me then, I don't want to be here, and then they end up playing. It always happens. It happens across the league. He brought up a good point, too. The franchise tag going nowhere. It only affects 30-plus players a season. They're not going to make a drastic change like that only impacts a handful of players throughout the league.
Yeah, I think the tag is something that's going to stay forever. The only change that could possibly be made is an exclusion of a couple positions. I think that was thrown out a couple of years ago during the whole running back debacle when they had their group chat and no one was getting extended and everything along those lines. That was something that was thrown out, but I think the franchise tag, for exactly the reasons Fitz said, is going to stay in place basically how it is right now. And I think T. Higgins will not play on the franchise tag next year, and it's not because he's going to opt out or sit out or hold out. I completely agree with that sentiment as well, that if he's tagged, he will play on that tag. I just think the Bengals will either get him extended or trade him on the tag. I don't think they're going to do the Jesse Bates again and have him play 1 year, dribble out the clock, and let him walk for free. I know they only tagged Jesse once. This would be the second time they're tagging T, but they would lose the ability to tag him next offseason, which is the ability to tag and trade him. I think that's the only negotiation tactic the Bengals have right now. If T. Higgins was on the true open market, he would almost certainly leave the Bengals. I know we can do the agent conversation and how much does he love playing with Joe, and all that's great, and I don't know how much that means. So I'm going to continue to operate along money, because that's the end all be all with most of these things. And if we get lucky that we have the one wide receiver in the history of sports that values friendships and relationships over money, that's awesome. And I love it. But most wide receivers especially do not. So I think if T. Higgins is on the open market, no tag, he would be about $33 million. I think if he comes back to Cincinnati, we're going to be looking at 28 to 30. So $2 to $3 million cutoff there. And I think that is a reliance on relationships and a belief in this offense and a belief in the ability to win championships. And maybe you can structure it in a way where it's competitive, but the Bengals can't match top market value. So they will tag T, and they'll try to get something done. And if not, I expect them to trade him. I do not think he will play this year on the tag, but not because of a holdout, just because I don't think the Bengals will take that risk.
I was only putting the thumbs down because as a fan of a rival team, I would be pissed if a player did what I love. I love when players do the whole, I want to be there for my guys, I want to be there for my team. I would hate that the team that is a rival of my team would finally find an athlete that actually values winning and relationships and that type of thing. But that would be good for the Cincinnati Bengals. And to be honest, that's the only thing that would get it done. My problem, and I know you guys won't view it this way, but my problem would be from a perception standpoint, if I'm T. Higgins, and Elliot, you keep saying he's a need. Joe Burrow came out and said he's a need. If Joe Burrow comes out and says, hey, we're going to restructure my contract, we're going to shave money off my deal, and Jamar Chase comes out and says, you know what, we value T, we need T, I'm not going to take every dollar that's coming to me, and then T takes a discount, you won't hear a peep out of me. That's fine. What I would have a problem with, my criticism of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase would be how selfish of those two if they continue to go to the media and say how much of a need T. Higgins is, but Joe takes every dollar coming to him, Jamar becomes the highest paid wide receiver in football, and T's supposed to take the discount when all you guys are telling him is that he's a need. That's my only pushback on all this. Of course, it doesn't matter if I have a problem with it or not. From a perception standpoint, cool. If T. Higgins says, hey, I'm willing to take less to stay in Cincinnati, then why didn't the other two friends of his agree to do the same thing? Because Joe had made it sound for years that we're going to be doing these things to, we know what we need to do to keep these guys here. But Joe didn't do that. All right. And there's nothing wrong with that. I have no problem with him taking every dollar going to him. He earned it. He deserved it. Same thing with Jamar. But what I don't want to see is don't gaslight this guy and tell him how much of a need he is, but say, hey, you got to be the one that takes less so that Jamar and Joe could take every dollar coming to them. That's the problem I would have with that. I know
Completely
you guys
fair.
probably won't.
No, I agree.
Issue I have with that.
I absolutely agree. I think I've said a couple of times now that if Joe Burrow is going to sit up there on the podium and say how important T. Higgins is, and Jamar Chase is going to say how much he likes playing next to T, they should go together and figure out how to make this work. That's my expectation, and I also would not ask T to take $5 million less than open market to play with the highest paid quarterback and the highest paid wide receiver of all time. That's just as bad, I think, for locker room chemistry than what happened this year. I think you're setting a pretty clear hierarchy about who you value in the locker room, and I don't think that's ever good, though everyone knows how that works on basically every single team. You don't need the contracts to tell you that, especially if the play doesn't necessarily depict the same thing. I think T. Higgins and Jamar Chase will both get wide receiver one money wherever they end up. I hope it's in Cincinnati, and if it does happen, the three of them will have to work together to make it happen.
Yeah, I'm gonna disagree with you guys a little bit because it's not the player's responsibility to run the franchise. Joe Burrow is getting paid $55 million a year to be the best quarterback in the NFL, the best pure passer in the NFL. Trevor Lawrence is also getting paid $55 million a year. That's what quarterbacks get paid. That's the average market value. I'm not going to sit here and say Joe Burrow needs to play for $25 million a year when a guy like Trevor Lawrence, out of all people, no disrespect, but come on, Trevor Lawrence hasn't been a good quarterback in the NFL, nowhere close, and making the same amount of money as Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow took what he was earned, took what he was owed, and Jamar Chase this offseason is going to become the highest paid wide receiver in the National Football League by probably a substantial margin, and that's both well-deserved. I mean, they both deserve that. I get that, Joe has come out and said, we're going to do whatever it takes to get it done. And maybe people wanted him to do his own restructuring. That's the franchise's responsibility. The Cincinnati Bengals, Mike Brown, Duke Tobin, those guys are responsible for stuff like that. And if they're unable to make moves and they have to rely on their quarterback and wide receiver to financially run their own franchise for them, I think we're in a much worse place than we think. So
Yeah.
I mean, if we want to say that T Higgins should be the beneficiary of Joe Burrow and Jamar doing their own thing and being kind to the franchise, I think that's it's an interesting take, because we kill, and I know Kinner does too. Everybody just destroys the Bengals for being the cheap organization. They've paid Joe Burrow, and I think they're going to pay Jamar Chase. The question will be, are they going to have what it takes to pay T Higgins as well? It's not the responsibility of my quarterback to worry about how the franchise runs.
To make it very clear, I'm not asking for Joe Burrow to make any less than $55 a year, and I'm not asking for Jamar Chase to make any less than $40 million plus a year. I think they both should still be at that top value. What I'm asking is to mess with the guarantees, because the Bengals have no issue with the cap to re-sign T Higgins. Zero issue with the cap. The issue is getting the guarantees and the money into escrow, and that's the problem with these three big contracts, is you're guaranteeing so much money in such a short window, and the Bengals aren't being cheap. They're just poor. They don't have the money. It's not like they could pay it. This isn't a cap situation where they're being poor and saying, we don't want to pay this guy that money. They don't have the cash to give him. So that's where Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase comes in. You don't take less money on an annual sense. You take less money in terms of guarantees. You play with the structure a little bit, sacrifice some money now for some money later, do a little gymnastics and make it work. That's how the Saints have been in cap hell for a decade. That's how the Rams get out of what they've been in. That's how a lot of the really good teams, even the Browns, have been able to manipulate cap structure and guarantees and everything like that to navigate around this Deshaun Watson contract and field a pretty competitive roster outside of the quarterback position. So there's ways to do it, and I'm certainly not asking Joe to take less than $55 a year, and I'm not asking Jamar to take less than $40. Where I'm asking him to mess with it is in the structure, because I think that's more than a feasible ask if you want to keep a second wide receiver one.
See, with that, and let's be clear, when I say I am asking Jamar Chase to take less than 40 and Joe Burrow to take less than 55, the reason I say that is because, and this is where I defer a little bit, if you're going to tell T, you can go get 30 to 35 in the open market, but you need to take 22 to 23 to stay here, why is he having to? I guess I keep going back to that. Joe Burrow keeps saying he's a need. Well, then Joe Burrow take less money. Well, hold on. I mean, he's not that much of a need. Now, Elliot, you bring up a good point. Joe Burrow's not the general manager. It's not like it's his pool of money that they're working with here. Jason Fitz brought up a good point. You look at the Eagles. They found a way to pay Jalen Hurts and Smith and obviously A.J. Brown and others. But the one reason that they were able to do that is when you look at the year that they went to the Super Bowl, go look at that defense. They drafted and developed every single player except for one on that side of the ball. They draft and develop well. They didn't have as many needs. So when you don't have to spend your money on needs, you get the luxury of looking at A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and saying, hey, we can make this work. My concern for the Bengals is you have so many needs. And I know what you're saying is if we're going to have a bad defense, you might as well lean into the offense. I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong, but also could be reckless in a league that has a salary cap. I don't know how. We saw this year, Joe Burrow led the league in passing. You had the Triple Crown leading wide receiver who led the league in every major statistical category out there at wide receiver. You had the guy that led the league in sacks, all of that, and it still wasn't good enough to make the playoffs. So leaning into that doesn't necessarily say that that's the right winning formula. That's just, hey, your quarterback's at least fun to watch on a team that's not good enough around him. Not a shot at Burrow, just the team as a whole. I just think T is not a need. I think he's a luxury for a team that does have so many needs at this point. For instance, I remember when I had a bunch of roommates in college, and when I finally graduated and had to get a place of my own, it's like all of a sudden maybe I don't need this. I need this Netflix subscription. All right, I need unlimited data on my phone. I need the biggest, the best Wi-Fi package. And then I had to start sitting back because I'm paying bills by myself, and I'm like, well, man, I guess I just want the best internet possible. I just want Netflix. I guess I just want unlimited data. I don't need those because I need gas for my car to get to work. I need my car to get to work. I need groceries, right? Like I need the power to be left on in my house. Those become needs. Wants all of a sudden become luxury items. And I think when you're the Bengals and have as many needs as they actually do, I don't know if T. Higgins is a need when you look at it at this particular point. But Joe Burrow's going to fight to the death to keep him there, and that's just because he's a good teammate, and you can't argue that when it's all said and done.
I don't think T. Higgins is a need for Joe Burrow, and I don't think T. Higgins is a need for Jamar Chase. I think T. Higgins is a need for Zach Taylor, and I think that's the conversation Joe Burrow is having in these press conferences. When he says T. Higgins is a need, I don't think he thinks that he's no longer an MVP caliber quarterback with just Jamar Chase. I think most people believe that in almost any system in the world, those two guys will be able to put up ungodly numbers no matter what. What he's saying is this team can win a Super Bowl with T. Higgins as the wide receiver too, and the ceiling for this offense is non-existent when both these guys are here, and we've seen the step that it takes back when T. Higgins is out, when Zach Taylor's calling these plays. If the Bengals had an Andy Reid, if the Bengals had one of these elite play callers, then sure, I would be more gung-ho on letting T. Higgins walk. But I think for what we're trying to do in Cincinnati with the head coach that we still have employed, I think T. Higgins is pretty close to a need. And I guess that's a good way to circle back around and say, if you need 2 wide receiver ones and the best quarterback in football, how good of a coach are you? And I guess I'm just not so sure.
Fair enough. And Elliot, you're not, and by the way, I did not say you're wrong. Like, if I'm a Bengals fan, I'd be pissed if T leaves. I'd be pissed if my team didn't keep. I get it 100%. But you keeping T is interrupting the chance for my Browns to have Shedeur Sanders throw an interception trying to go deep to T. Higgins up the sideline, okay? So you're getting in the way of my dream and my reality a season from now. So let's be clear, but nonetheless. All right, this is Off the Bench presented by United. What's that?
I was gonna say I was gonna if I was in studio, I would have made another comment to Jason. The Browns do notoriously hit those quarterbacks early in the draft very well, so I'd imagine they're going to keep and draft, and they're going to be very successful next year.
Very. And we'll be right back. Off the Bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers. Not today, Satan. Not today. All right, and we welcome you back. Off the Bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers. Justin Kinner, Elliot Rearing, Jacob Tissett with you here. Appreciate Jason Fitz from Yahoo Sports giving us some time. We did lock down Mike Golick Jr. For tomorrow, and we'll talk Notre Dame. We'll talk college football playoffs. We do have college football playoff talk coming up here about 15 minutes from now as well. But excited to have Mike Golick Jr. on. Him and Jason Fitz used to work together. So it's funny because so there's Mike and Mike for the longest time in the morning. And then obviously Greeny was too good and to work with obviously Mike Golick anymore. So then they brought in Trey Wingo to do the morning show with Mike Golick Sr. And then they brought in Mike Golick Jr. to work the show. And then Jason Fitz was working that show as well. So that's how I got to know all of them real well. So excited to have Jason on regularly. We're going to have Mike Golick on tomorrow. Trey Wingo, he's in Los Angeles. So we're trying to lock in a time to be able to make the time difference work. But remember, Wingo came on back in August. And even me, the biggest Bengals hater out there, according to some, he said, there's just something not right about the Bengals. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're all healthy. Yeah, this Jamar Chase thing, it's not convenient, but like this happens to good teams. You have good players who fight with the, I don't understand. But no, he was right. He was right. There's something wasn't right, and it obviously led to that slow start. But we're gonna catch up with him just so we can say, hey, you were right, we were wrong. Our bad.
Yeah, he deserves it. He deserves it for sure.
Sad. But by the way, I looked at the record without T. Higgins. I believe the Bengals are 5-8 all time without T. Higgins when he's been injured. He makes a difference. So I just wanted to add that one. I wanted to add one last point on before we switch over to rest.
And I'm learning how to counter an argument without sounding like such a D-bag all the time, because I do think what leads to blow-ups is my arrogant tone. So I'm learning how to counter argue without coming across as a jerk. So with that though, Josh Allen, I mean, you don't at the end of the day, T. Higgins, you don't think he'd make a difference in Buffalo or Kansas City? I think you take any elite wide receiver away from any quarterback, you're going to see some drop off. I mean, I always bring up the Patrick Mahomes thing. His numbers, I mean, they kept winning. They won back-to-back Super Bowls without Tyreek Hill, but it's not like his numbers were as elite. I mean, it's not a surprise Patrick Mahomes doesn't look as elite this season as in years past when all his weapons are gone. And with Joe Burrow's numbers take a hit slightly, but would his effectiveness go away? No. Patrick Mahomes' numbers aren't sexy, but to say he's not effective, that's not true. Joe Burrow is paid to be effective even if his numbers aren't as sexy, and I think that would still continue to be the case. If that's why I said I just don't think he's a need, he's a want. I think the production would drop off, yes, but at the same time, keeping T at the expense of other needs on the team, I wouldn't feel comfortable with that. But again, you're right, though. Look at this season. With the defensive deficiencies, Allie, this, to your point, even with the defensive deficiencies, they were bad in the back half too defensively, although slightly improved. T. Higgins is healthy. If they would have made the playoffs, you guys are right. Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs didn't want to play the Bengals. The Bills wouldn't want to play the Bengals. Josh Allen would love to be throwing the ball against the Bengals defense, but it's not guaranteeing them a win because Joe Burrow is going to be throwing against their defense. So they almost made the playoffs and were going to be a dangerous team in the playoffs, even with the bad defense, because of having T and Jamar. So I see that argument too from that standpoint.
The difference, I would argue, is that the other teams have, they have other talent elsewhere. If Joe Burrow loses even a little bit on offense, they don't win games this past season. So, that's my only counter argument is, Patrick Mahomes doesn't need to play perfect. He doesn't need to win the MVP. He doesn't need to make the Pro Bowl. He just has to be essentially a game manager. And I know that Patrick Mahomes isn't that, but if he is a game manager, they have enough talent on that roster to make a run, So you see it with the 49ers. The 49ers, outside of this year when their whole roster got depleted with injuries, usually, they don't have to have the world's best quarterback. They've got it elsewhere. You take away our quarterback's second best option and the offense drops even just a little bit, those 44-38 losses become 44-28 losses. The shootouts with the Commanders become 38 to 17 and stuff like that. So it's a little bit of a difference. That's my final point. That's my final point before we move to baseball.
Oh no, my final point.
Let's go.
But then go get a defense. Go get a defense then. Like I'm you're keeping T because you think so are you not confident that their defense will get better moving forward? I guess.
Correct.
Correct.
100%.
Yes.
You can control keeping T. You can't control improving the defense, even though you have draft picks and money to spend.
And we've whiffed so many times. Yeah. And that's where I'm at too. Take the sure thing. We saw Jesse Bates walk. We flushed so much money into the safety position to try to replace him. We let DJ Reader walk. We flushed 2 draft picks into interior D-line to try to replace him. You have a guy who's really good. It's going to be really hard to get someone who's as good as him ever again in Cincinnati because you're not going to go free agency and get a top market value wide receiver. The only chance is at an extension. So I think it's a matter of not having a lot else that you can rely on in Cincinnati right now.
Well, let's talk about that other little engine that could in Cincinnati. Let's talk about those Cincinnati Reds. All right, let's talk about that. They're trying. They would love to have a situation like the Bengals where they just have all these good players and just don't know how to keep them all. They're trending in that direction, but you got to continue adding good players to be in the situation that the Bengals are in. But Gavin Lux, I know we talked about it during headlines in the first hour, but the Reds made some news yesterday. They basically were able to give up not that much to go get Gavin Lux again. A recognizable name, as Jacob talked about, a veteran name, a player that statistically brings a lot to the table, but another typical Reds type of player. And we've had this debate in the past. Do you want a player that is an elite third baseman that can't play other positions, or do you want a guy that can come in and play some third, play some second, play some outfield? That's what Gavin Lux brings to the table, and that's not a bad thing. The depth was a problem for the Reds. Remember, and by the way, last year, we learned our lesson. Another middle infielder? Are you kidding me? I'll never do that again. Another middle infielder in Gavin Lux. What does he bring to the table? How much better does he make this Reds team? And what holes does he address, in your opinion? Very versatile player, veteran player. They got him on the cheap. I like this move for the Reds overall. Is it winning him a World Series? No, but these pieces are sometimes just as important as those big splash pieces. You go get a Shohei Ohtani and make no other moves. The Reds aren't that much better, to be quite honest with you. You make all these smaller moves, gradually filling some of these holes. All of a sudden, the Reds are drastically better. Your guys' thoughts on Gavin Lux?
Yeah, first and foremost, great players have a position. So when you get someone and the graphic says infielder or outfielder, then you know that they're going to be, you hope they're great. You hope they can come on here and...
or Jacob, in this case, infielder/outfielder.
That's all of them. That's all of them. So, yeah, no, shout out to Gavin Lux. Hopefully he's versatile and he can be great. The one thing I am holding on to here with this trade that's a little bit different than trading for any other utility man, Gavin Lux was the number 2 overall prospect in baseball in 2020 when he came up. That's worth something. He has some potential, and we got him for free. He can play positions, and we need versatility in this roster. Jonathan India was a guy we thought was going to be the utility player, and we moved him for Brady Singer, and we got a little bit better version of Jonathan India, and we still have Brady Singer. So I think it's a really exciting trade. The other part of a utility player, when they come from the Dodgers, maybe they're not a utility player. Maybe they're really freaking good, and they just happen to be stuck behind a bunch of all-stars in LA. So I'm holding out a lot of hope for Gavin Lux. He started on a World Series champion last season, so that means something. He has playoff experience. He's been to the mountaintop. I think that helps in this locker room just as much as a lot of the stats that you have with Gavin Lux in terms of the young players and everything else going on here. But we said it during headlines, and I'll say it again here. I'm very, very happy to have Gavin Lux on the Reds. I think this is the type of trades the Reds should be making. You give up little to nothing, and you get guys that are a little bit better than lottery tickets, and you hope that they can be incredible. I mean, Lux was hitting over 300 to end the year last year in the second half. It was an unbelievable end of the season. He looked great. He looked a little bit closer to what that prospect hope was. If he can come into anything like that in Cincinnati, that's great. But if he's the solution, if he's the big trade to fix this team and get us to the playoffs, then it's a miserable embarrassment of a failure of an offseason.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo what Jacob said, and here's the thing: you the viewers at home, they know what kind of fan I am when I watch this team. I said it on yesterday's show. I'm a pessimist. I tend to not believe in the teams in this city. I'm a fan. I love them. I go to the games. I watch them. But this is a move. I'm no doubt about it. Jacob hit it on the head. It's a good move. He's a very good player. He's a fine ball player. But my argument is, are we just here to take the scraps from everybody else?
Yes.
And we're going to just try to make this
yes
scrap. We're going to make this
it.
scrap super lineup of all the players that can play all the positions. Because if that's the case, and you know, I'm just complaining into a wall here because I know that's how it is when you're a small market team. When the Dodgers are paying Shohei Ohtani $2 million a year and then $95 million the day he retires, I understand we're not playing a fair sport. I get that. And Nick Kroll this offseason has undoubtedly made the roster better than they were last season. The roster is better today than they were at the end of last season, 100%. My argument against this is if he's here to go play in the outfield, it's not a good move. If he's there to help in the outfield, I can live with that. And if he's here to play third base instead of Noelvi Marte, I really like this move. I think he's a better player than Noelvi Marte at this very moment. And if that's why he's here, I don't know fully. I know Chatterbox Reds was discussing it last night, and they were saying he can play in the outfield and he can play left field for Spencer Steer. Spencer can DH. I don't think he's that much better of a defender in the outfield. They kept throwing stats at me last night. It was Spencer Steer has a -4 outs above average, and this guy, you know, he has a -2 outs above average. Gavin Lux, I don't hate him. I like the move. But if we're going to do the same thing over and over again, we're just going to keep putting middle infielders in the outfield and hoping they work. I don't think that's the method for success. Maybe that's what the Reds have to do. Maybe that's just the reality of our situation. I just don't think, like, coming into this season, that this is some playoff roster. I think they could perform above expectations and sneak into the wild card. I think the NL Central is so bad that they could possibly win this division with 85, 86 wins. I think that's a realistic a hope, not an expectation, but a hope. I just don't know if what they've done this offseason is enough. Again, they're better today than they were at the end of last season, 100%.
I think something that's interesting.
Nick Martinez is, you know, he's a reliever, and we're asking him to be a full-time starter. We have Gavin Lux, who's an infielder who's played 45 games in the outfield, who we're now asking to play in the outfield, allegedly. And he can play third base, and I could be wrong on that. You know, Brady Singer's, he's a good player. He's a solid pitcher. I wouldn't say he's one of the best pitchers in the league, but he's, you know, he'll give you innings. The bullpen is another issue, and I think that a lot of people need to be concerned that if there are injuries in the bullpen this year, do we have enough depth to fix that? Last year, Kinner's right. I complained about having too many infielders. Won't do that again. I'm glad to have as many infielders as possible. I just wish they would have gone out and gotten a free agent outfielder, because that's what Nick Kroll said they were going to do. He said one of the key needs this team had was that outfield power bat. Haven't gotten it. Now, he said there's still a little wiggle room, so there could be a move still, and I think there will be. I don't think they're done spending yet. I don't think they're done making moves yet. So we'll see what the Reds do, but there are still areas of concern on top of the fact that the 2025 Reds are dependent upon every single one of our prospects, our young guys, our core hitting. And that's the big thing. You need to hit on Matt McClain. He has to be healthy. Spencer Steer has to be good. CES is a player that if he starts next year has to be good. So that's just where we are as Reds fans, I guess.
I think the interesting nugget with Gavin Lux, and you just said it a couple times in there, the two places that we point to most for where Lux is going to play, third base or potentially in the outfield. And I think it does open the door for Matt McClain to potentially play third base. I think one of those two guys will be there and the other one will be at second. Gavin Lux has never played third in Major League Baseball. He didn't play a single game there last year. He missed all of 2023 with an injury. He didn't play a single game there in 2022. We're trading for a guy to potentially play every day at a position that he hasn't played. He came up as a shortstop, and he played second base predominantly for the Dodgers with a little bit of outfield work. I think this is exciting if he can come on and be an everyday third baseman. Hell yeah, that rocks. I absolutely love it. Nick Kirby's putting some stats in the chat, WRC plus, stuff like that, saying we're calling this guy scraps. He had a really good second half last year. That's great. I hope he's going to be awesome here. But it's a guy that didn't fit on a championship roster, so the Reds said, here, we'll take him. And that's just kind of where we've lived for a while now, and that's the life of a small market fan. I hope it does work out. I hope everyone that's as thrilled about Gavin Lux as some people are absolutely right, and he's just another superstar to add to this core. But I just don't necessarily see it trending that way. I think he'll be a great piece, and hopefully he performs well for the Reds in a utility role.
Yeah, and here's my thing too. Nick Kirby, I know what kind of Reds, guy he is. He's a very positive Reds guy. And to any Reds fan out there that wants to be positive about the move. I have no doubt in my mind. But if you realistically think that the Reds are a playoff caliber team with the addition of Gavin Lux, I can't really help you. I mean, it's basically the same roster with another utility player added on, and you added Brady Singer. So I'm hoping the Reds are going to perform. Scraps is a word that he picked on there. The Dodgers didn't want to keep him on the roster, and we didn't really give up anything. So I don't know what you would call that, because usually a good player would require, some decent caliber talent to be traded for him. I like Gavin Lux. I'm not bashing Gavin Lux. Gavin Lux is a good player. I'd like Gavin Lux to be on the Reds.
I'm excited.
A utility guy. As a utility guy, but if he's going to be a key contributor next year, we'll have to see. Because I have a hard time imagining this team is some World Series contender, NL Central Division contender with this move. There's more work to be done. It's a good move. The Reds are better than they were last year.
And that's the most important thing. They're better today than they were yesterday. They're better today than they were last year. And there is still time until opening day. They can still make a move. I know we're all kind of, head down saying this might be it. They might be done. But there is still time. So I'm still holding out hope. If they get another outfielder and this becomes an add-on extra move, then boy, am I thrilled. But like I said before, if this is the outfield help, woof.
So I do think, and look, this is a show where we react to everything the Bengals do. We react to it. Major sports headlines, we react to it. The Reds, everything they do, we're going to react to it. So we're reacting to everything that they do. I will say that not everything that they do needs to have a reaction to such a high level, good or bad. I don't think this is a bad move. I don't think it's a great move. I think this is just it's a move that the Reds saw an opportunity and said, hey, let's just go. Let's pull the trigger on this. If we get to opening day, I don't think we're going to say, man, our fortunes really turned when we were able to get Gavin Lux from the Dodgers, back in early January. I think it's one of those where if they're, you get Brady Singer, you have Gavin Lux, and then they end up getting another big name. And again, your definition of big and everyone's could be different. I get that. But if they make some more moves moving forward, I don't think they're done. You heard, obviously, Nick Kroll come out and say basically that there's some wiggle room there. There's some flexibility there. There's, not a lot, but there's something to work with some money that they have remaining to go spend. I don't think they're done spending. I think they're going to add. But I think that the next name they add, I think it's going to be very similar to this conversation. It's not going to be a name that we feel is going to be a key piece to a World Series by any means, or maybe it will. Who knows? But I will say the Reds got some good advice. I don't know about you guys, but if you ever go to a Goodwill or if you ever go to garage sailing, do you go to rundown neighborhoods garage sailing? Man, I wonder what nice do you go to a bad neighborhood and say, it's garage sales? Man, I wonder what nice stuff we're going to get here. You're probably not. All right. And this isn't a shot at people. I'm just saying, it's just the reality of it. I don't go garage selling at average looking neighborhoods. I go to the nice neighborhoods. I go to the neighborhoods that I have no business walking around in. All right. I might be making people uncomfortable. Who is that poor POS walking around our neighborhood? I'm just looking for your scraps. All right. Because rich people's scraps are really nice to poor people like the Cincinnati Reds, okay? So I have no problem. You don't go to Goodwill and just average little towns. You go to the nice towns and go to their Goodwills because they're going to have much nicer stuff right there. And that's what the Reds do. They're not going to the A's saying, hey, you guys got anything? You got any scraps? No. They're going to the Dodgers. I have no problem taking scraps from the Dodgers. Keep the scraps coming, Dodgers. If we're going to take scraps, get the best scraps possible, and the Reds are doing that, I guess, at the end of the day. So there you go. We got to wrap this up soon. I got to go garage sailing. I got the itch. All right, this is Off the Bench presented by United Dairy Farmers, Chatterbox Sports on YouTube, ESPN 1410 Wing AM in Dayton. College football playoff semifinals coming up this Thursday and Friday. Penn State, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Texas. Texas is a 6-point dog against the Buckeyes, and it sounds like, after our conversation with Jason Fitz a little bit ago, that it can get ugly. Is that line too favorable in favor of the Texas Longhorns? We'll talk about that. More college football headlines when we come back. More Off the Bench next. All right, and we are back Off the Bench presented by United Dairy Farmers. Justin Kinner, Jacob Tissett, Elliot Rearing, live here on a Tuesday. Shout out to Jason Fitz. Yahoo Sports gave us time earlier. Talked to Bengals, talked to college football. We'll get to more college football talk coming up here in a moment. But Gavin Lux, the newest Cincinnati Reds acquisition, of course, from the Dodgers. A lot of reaction to that. Every time the Reds make a move and it's not a splashy move, it's, oh, yeah, that's going to win us a World Series. I'm with you. I love the social media reactions every time the Reds make a move. But at the end of the day, hopefully this is one of those just depth pieces, and there's still more to come. But we are running out of offseason. We are. But, Elliot, you said you had a Reds question you wanted to throw out.
Yeah, so I was talking with our good friend Reds Daily yesterday, and I thought this was a good sports talk moment. Usually when you save this for mid-July, mid-August, but we can do this right now. I was texting him yesterday about the move and about Gavin Lux. What do you think of the roster heading into this season? And I think we were both under the same umbrella where it was they're okay. It's a solid roster if the guys that we drafted to perform well this year. If Ellie has another great year, which I'm sure he will, if Steer and CES are great, if Noelvi Marte plays good baseball, sure, maybe they can be able to make the playoffs, squeak in. But this is a conversation I had because it comes down to me essentially being the negative Reds fan, and that's fine if I'm labeled as such. I would argue my argument for myself would be, there hasn't been a ton to celebrate over the past 30 years. I'm 25 years old. Not a lot there. But this was a conversation I had yesterday. If the Reds win the NL Central, if I told you this year, so we're not watching the season, I'm just telling you right now, if the Reds win the NL Central, but they get bounced in the first round of the playoffs this year, is the season a failure? Or is the season a success?
Absolutely a successful season. Absolutely a successful season. I think you win the division, that's step one, and then you win a playoff series, that's step two. But the Reds haven't accomplished a goal like that in a while, and I don't count 2020 as making the playoffs because it was a shortened season, and if I'm going to take away the Dodgers ring, then I have to take away our playoff appearance as well. So that's how I operate. So if the Reds can win the division and make the playoffs, and regardless of how that first round goes, I'm very happy if the Reds are champions of the NL Central this season. It might take a while after we get bounced. But I think you'd have to be relatively excited.
I think there's levels to this stuff too, because, for instance, had the Bengals made the play, like let's say that they would have got the help over the weekend and made the playoffs, right? And they get knocked out of the first round of the playoffs. You know, if you would, or let's say they win the division or the wild card round and they lose in the divisional round. 4 or 5 years ago, the Bengals winning a wild card playoff game was the biggest thing in 30 years for that organization. They finally won a playoff game. That would not have been a failure that year to not get to the Super Bowl. That would have just been, hey, we made the playoffs with our new franchise quarterback. We won a playoff game. Everything is great. Hell, it still would have been a success just getting to the playoff after the drought that they were on. But now, if they would have made the playoffs this year and lost in the wild card or the divisional round, that would have been a failure because there were Super Bowl expectations. I do think the expectations at the beginning of the season are the standard and the bar that you have to hold the result towards when the season's done. So, Elliot, if the expectation for the Reds is to win the division and they win the division and make the playoffs, I'm not saying I don't care if they win or not in the playoffs, but I'm going to be bummed that they lose, but I'm like, that's still a great year. Terry Francona is leading us in the right direction. We feel
up and to the right. Just keep going up and to the right.
Last year, I had, Brad Meter, the general manager of the Reds, when Nick Kirby and I had him on when we were doing the show at Reds Fest. I said, what is the expectation? When you look at the roster heading into this season, what is the expectation for this year? Brad Meter, the general manager of the Reds, said to win the division. They didn't even make the playoffs. That is a failure of a season. So I do think it's whatever the expectation that you or the team has at the beginning of the season. If that's not what they reach at the end of the season, to me, maybe that's too vague. That's how I judge whether it's a failure or not. But from a fan perspective, yes, Elliot, I never want to get into the habit of just saying, well, at least we got here. At least we got here. At least we got here. You want them to win in the playoffs. You want them to win the whole damn thing. You never want it to be like you never want to have that mid-major perspective of, I just want to get to the tournament. I don't even care if we win a game or not. No, you get to the tournament. You want to win a damn game and make it interesting. So I see both sides of that conversation.
I certainly want to win in the playoffs. I'm not saying I don't want to win in the playoffs. I'm just saying with this team and where they're at right now, winning the NL Central this season would be pretty hard to turn your nose up at.
Yeah, I mean, if you told me right now, I in my lifetime, I see 10 NL Central titles, 10 NL Central crowns with 0 World Series appearances and 0 World Series wins, I would consider my time as a Reds fan a failure. And that's just how I've always operated. I'm in this to win championships. It's why I don't watch college football, because the teams I cheer for don't have a chance for that. And I know Jacob and Reed and everybody disagrees with me on what the expectation should be coming into a year. If the Reds make the playoffs this year, I'll be over the moon. It's not a failure to make the playoffs. It's not a failure to win the NL Central. I consider it a failure to go my entire life without, a World Series championship, because that is my end goal. That's my personal end goal, being a Reds fan. That's why I go to 25 Reds games a year. It's why I watch over 150 Reds games a season. I'm in it because I love them. I want to cheer for them, and I want to believe that there is a shot at a championship with this ball club, and maybe there will be one day. Who knows? I just think if you told me right now that while Terry Francona's here, we have 2 NL Central titles and 0 playoff advancements, I would call that a failure.
I'd agree too. If you're saying over Terry's whole tenure, yeah, for sure, that's definitely a failure.
But yeah, like if the Reds win this, if the Reds win the Central, yeah, hell yeah, I'm going to be happy. If the Reds get to the playoffs, hell yeah, I'm going to be happy. But when the Reds season ends in the first round with a sweep by the Phillies, I'm going to be frustrated and I'm going to be disappointed, or whoever it might be that would sweep the Reds. That would be, in my eyes, I hate to quote the Billy Bean, if you don't win the last game of the season, nobody gives a rip. But that's the truth. And that's how I've always been a fan. And I just need one. All the Bengals had to do was give me that one, and then we'd all be happy. But that's not the case. We're still fighting for our first. At least Jacob and I are. Kinner, you got to see one of them. But I think, the rest of us got the new fans, the new age Cincinnati sports fans. We're still waiting on number one. And until we get it, I'm going to continue to be a little bit disappointed that I don't have one.
I see people in the chat saying nothing's going to change organizationally with either of these teams until we stop giving them our money, stop going to the games, stop supporting the team, stop buying the merch, and that's how you get change. Hate to break it to you guys, that's not going to happen. Maybe I can only speak for myself here, but I mean, the Reds could go 0-162 if they still have the gates open in that stadium. I'll still go to games. The Bengals could be picking number one in the draft for a decade, and Mike Brown could not put any money into that organization. Every chance I get to sit in Paycor Stadium, I'm still going to take that. I'm still going to buy jerseys. I'm still going to buy t-shirts and hats. I love these teams even if they hate me, and every now and then I start to ask, do these teams hate me? And I don't know, but I'm going to continue to love them, and I'm going to continue to root for them no matter what. I know that's the answer. I know the way to get organizations to change and ownership to change is to hurt their pockets, but I'm just not willing to do that because in my eyes, I'm punishing myself more than I'm punishing anyone else by not watching the Reds, not going to Bengals games. That's just not an option for me. So I'm going to continue to cross my fingers and pray that something changes in the Castellinis and the Browns' minds, that they want to commit to winning, because I'm not going to do what I know it would take to really change their pockets, because I love these teams too much, and maybe it's, our fault, fans like us that keep going to 25, 30 games a year when the Reds don't give us any reason to believe in actually competing for a championship. But I'm going to continue to do it because I love these teams, and I was born here, and it's a curse, but I'll wear it on my sleeve.
Well, that theory would work as well, not going to games and buying merch. And that theory would work if these jerks of owners didn't just get a gigantic check at the beginning of the season for their media rights deal. Like, that's what stinks. Everyone right away said, man, the Reds are screwed because they're losing money in the media rights deal. Hey, I don't feel bad for the Castellinis because you know how you can make up some of that dollars? All right. If you go put a big ass product on the field and you fill up your ballpark the entire season, and you have people who want to buy your merch all season, guess what? That closes the gap on the money you lost going, losing the Bally deal and going to MLB when it's all said and done. But yeah, like, that's the unfortunate part. That's why I always said TV, the network deals were the worst thing to ever happen to sports, because back in the day, the only way owners made money was the tickets, was the vendors inside the stadium or the arena. Like, they had to put a good product out there to get you to come to the games, just like a restaurant has to put good food out there, just like any business has to put a good product out there. Professional sports does not have to put a good product out there because the TV rights deal, they give them the money up front. There's no, once the season starts, the Brown family, the Castellinis, they don't care because they already got their money up front. Now, could they make more? Yes, absolutely, if they invested more into the product, but they look at the bottom line of, well, here's what I'm guaranteed to walk out of this season with if I don't spend another dime, and it's like they circle that and they're happy with it when it's all said and done. That I hated the TV deal thing because that's ruined sports more than anything. Teams just don't care. The Castellinis are fine with, let's just put a semi-competitive team out there, keep people interested through May and June, hopefully. But hey, we get our money no matter what, and I hate that. But I don't even know what the hell we're talking about.
Well, that's the issue. That's the issue this year is that they're not getting the TV deal. I don't know what kind of TV deal they're going to get. So,
they have an out.
So we'll see what that looks like after this season. Maybe there's a ton of Reds fans that buy that package. For me, I know I'll probably just use the local channels and won't buy that. So we'll have to see. It's everybody's personal preference. And also,
I do wonder how that
Reds,
local channel ordeal will be handled with different streaming services like YouTube TV, DirecTV Plus, all the different non-box cable services. I know sometimes local broadcasts are hard to get on there. So maybe that's a pretty big market segment that will be buying that subscription.
Yeah, 100%. We'll have to see how this year pans out. I just know, like Jacob, I'm going to still go to 20 Reds games a year. That never changes. I still cheer for the Reds, despite what people think. I'm still a fan. It's just I expect a little bit more. It's why I get into sports. It's having the ability to dream of a championship. That's what we're all in it for. If I told everybody right now that the Reds had a 0.0% chance to ever win anything in the postseason, nobody would watch. So But we have that hope. You have that ability coming into this season. I think the Reds are going to be better. I think Terry Francona is a guy that did a lot with not a lot of money in Cleveland. So there is the possibility that he changes the way this organization's run a little bit, and that he's able to get more out of Ellie De La Cruz. He's able to get more out of guys like TJ Friedel, and these utility guys like Gavin Lux and Spencer Steer. So I'm excited for this season, and I'm ready to go. I'm going to come out and I'm going to say that the Reds are going to be in contention for that NL Central crown, and if they win it, I'm going to be very, very happy. I just, I one day I'd like to see a little bit of advancement in the postseason. But that's where I am.
Jim M in our chat with a phenomenal idea to solve all of our problems, Elliot. He says the Reds should just start their own network and then sign Rookie Sasaki and stream all the games in Japan and make millions hand over fist.
Honestly, I think they should do it.
That's not a bad idea.
I think they should absolutely do it.
Chestnut checkers when it's all said and done. But all right, that wraps it up for us on the radio side.
Good playoff talk, Kenner.
Oh no, we got that coming up next. That's coming up next on the YouTube side. You want college football playoff talk? Head to Chatterbox Sports on YouTube. But appreciate everyone tuning in on the radio side. We'll do it again tomorrow. Until tomorrow, this has been Off the Bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers.
Oh, YouTube only. Welcome in. Chatterbox After Dark at 11:38 a.m. I love that.
We have some big basketball games tonight, gentlemen.
We do have some big basketball games tonight. We also have some other big NFL news, but go ahead and get your college basketball.
Hold up, time out. Elliot said he wanted to talk about Joy Taylor. Elliot specifically said during the break, hot takes on Joy Taylor. Is that not for this segment? Maybe if we have time to say,
I'd like this on the record, and I want everybody to hear me regarding my thoughts on Joy Taylor, and I want everybody to take this very seriously.
This will be clipped.
No comment.
Okay, that's fair.
Xavier, they take on St. John's tonight at home, 6:30 p. Patino comes into Cintas Center, and then you have the Bearcats traveling to Baylor at 8 p.m. ESPN Plus, FS1 for Xavier. Two pretty important games for both programs, honestly. So we'll see what happens there. But I just wanted to mention that we will have Keegan Nickerson on tomorrow to discuss whether or not the Bearcats are going to be okay this season.
Love that.
What happens tonight.
What are they, 0-2 in the Big 12?
Yeah, not good. It's I'm getting worried. I'll see what happens tonight. If they lose tonight by a significant margin.
That Kansas game's coming up, no?
We're in trouble. What?
That Kansas game's coming up. Is it not? I thought it was like mid-January, right?
I think it's this week, isn't it?
Is it?
I thought so.
Well, that will be
Saturday. Yeah, they play Saturday.
All right, so they'll beat Baylor, and you'll be all the way back in, and then they're going to get just absolutely steamrolled by Kansas at home.
Yeah, Kansas is going to take our money.
Kansas is so good. I know they lost a game or two, but they are so good, man. While we're on college basketball, I'll do it every time we get a college basketball segment going. The SEC is unbelievable. They are unbelievably good. Every single team, top to bottom in the SEC, is borderline a tournament contender, or at least on the bubble. I mean, this is... It's insane what they're able to do so far this year. We already got into SEC play, obviously started a couple days ago, and the games have been incredible. Tennessee's still undefeated. They're at the top. They're the number one team in the country. 1, 2, 5, 6, 8, 10, 14, 23, 24 in the SEC. That's unbelievable. The 17th ranked team in the country is currently in 8th in the SEC. It's just unbelievable how good that league is this year. But the other news that popped up that I wanted to touch on real quick, because we talked about the name yesterday for the Bengals with Lou Anarumo's firing, Robert Saleh. He was Craig Sandlin's number 1 overall pick for DC when we talked about it on Chatterbox Bengals yesterday, and we obviously talked about the name here. It'd be a big-time hire for the Bengals, but he was on the list of head coaching interviews for the Jaguars. Jaguars list of head coaching interviews: Kellen Moore, Todd Monken, Joe Brady, Liam Cohen, Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, Patrick Graham, and Robert Saleh. So a lengthy list there. Not sure who will take that job. There have been some reports that there could potentially be a deal already done between Ben Johnson and the Jaguars front office for Ben Johnson to be their next head coach. So we'll be interested to see how that shakes out. Mike Vrabel taking a bunch of interviews as well. And I think most people have him penciled into the New England job, though. So as the NFL offseason starts to progress, some of these head coaching jobs coming more into the picture. But as you see right there, it's OCs. It's OCs everywhere. If you fire your head coach, you're hiring an offensive coordinator. That's how the game has changed. Kellen Moore, Todd Monken, Joe Brady, Liam Cohen, Ben Johnson, all OCs of top offenses in football. That's where everyone goes.
Do you think the Jaguars take a look at Urban Meyer? I don't know if they've thought of that.
They should go hire Lincoln Riley and just keep going back to college and pull him a top name.
I tell you what,
we said we were
the way your guys' kicking game has been this year, if I'm Zach Taylor, I hire Urban Meyer for a day just to kick the hell out of your kick and then fire him.
Yes, I'm in. Friend of the program. Friend of the program, Urban Meyer.
He is a friend of the program. Jacob and I said we were going to talk about it. We never talked about it today. Your thoughts on the Patriots letting go of Mayo?
Yeah, that's certainly interesting. Fired Gerard Mayo after just 1 year as the Patriots head coach. We talked about it yesterday. He was never their defensive coordinator. I learned yesterday a lot of people thought he was their defensive coordinator last year and then was promoted to their head coach. He never called plays on either side of the ball. He was a linebackers coach last year. Steve Belichick, the DC before he went to Washington, now at North Carolina. Bill Belichick obviously left. He retired for an instant and then now head coaching at North Carolina as well. And Gerard Mayo took over, but Gerard Mayo took over for a reason, and he took over because he had a clause in his contract that he was the coach in waiting. Now, that's not a legal requirement, but there are a bunch of hurdles you have to jump through if you don't want to hire your coach in waiting. So it made life a lot easier for the Patriots to just hire Gerard Mayo. And after firing him, Robert Kraft said it's one of the toughest decisions he's ever had to make in his career. But he said the situation was just untenable for Mayo. He knew this season was going to be a failure. He threw him into the fire without expecting any success and then fired him because of it. So I firmly believe that if Mike Vrabel is hired as the Patriots head coach, they've had this deal in place for as long as 2 years. When Vrabel left last year, I think most people had him circled as the Patriots' next head coach. He's in their Ring of Honor as a player, but obviously didn't get the job. It went to Mayo, and then Vrabel just didn't take a job. He took a consulting role with the Cleveland Browns, and he was immediately free to sign a contract with any NFL team immediately following Week 18, assuming the Browns didn't make the playoffs. So as soon as the regular season ends, Vrabel's contract allowed him to hit the interview market at full speed, really before most other coaches. So I think a lot of this was set up with a plan in place to get Mike Vrabel to New England without jumping through a lot of the hoops last year. Now, that is just conjecture. It's just me connecting a lot of dots and taking a guess, but if they do hire Mike Vrabel, I think an NFL investigation could potentially come into play.
Classic Robert Kraft, by the way. He makes a bad decision and buys his way out of it. I mean, classic Robert Kraft, always there to have his money clean up his mistakes.
You're right.
What?
You're right.
The Krafts have always done it their own way, so I'm not shocked by this. But they had to know how bad this was going to look.
Yeah,
optically, this is a disgusting move. Quite frankly, and I think you saw. I don't know if anybody saw this, but Gronk was on one of those NFL shows on Sunday, and he was about to rip into the Krafts. And I think the Fox executives or whoever it was, they went over into the producers like, "Stop this! Yeah. Don't let him attack the Kraft family on our airwaves." I think it's a bad look because this is a setup. I mean, you hired this guy in seemingly good faith, at least in his eyes, probably, that you were going to give him a chance to develop. You don't You don't fire somebody after one disaster of a season when you know that season's going to be a disaster. Part of the journey is the rebuild, and you can't just skip that part for a head coach. That's a massive problem. I think it's a really bad look, but we'll see if the Crafts do what Jacob said, hire Vrabel, and it would.
I think it'd be a great
sense.
hire for New England with the pieces they have, where they're trying to go, build it from the ground up. I think Vrabel would be a great get for them, but kind of interesting how they got there.
Yeah, and at the end, look, things are not good in New England right now, but Robert Kraft will do whatever he has to get that happy ending. And I think that, at the end of the day, I think Mike Vrabel could potentially be that. So we'll see what ends up happening.
All right, college football.
Man.
This is supposed to be a
Hold
college
on.
football segment.
No. We're not off the NFL yet. We have the first Bengals defensive coordinator interview. It's a name I just mentioned. He was on the Jaguars head coach interview list. It's Patrick Graham. Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator for the Las Vegas Raiders, obviously has had a decent unit there over the last few years, even though they haven't been able to scratch and claw for wins. Highly regarded in the NFL. He spent a lot of time on Bill Belichick's staffs in New England from 2009 to 2015. He was the Giants D-line coach, the Packers linebackers coach, the Dolphins DC in 2019 before being the assistant head coach and defensive coordinator for the Giants in 2020 and 2021, and he's been the Raiders DC ever since. So a guy who's been in the league for a long time, highly regarded on that side of the football. He will be the Bengals' first listed interview for the defensive coordinator opening. Not a name we had thrown out yet. We had been talking about the ex-head coaches or even Al Golden. Obviously, an Al Golden interview wouldn't come until Notre Dame's season is over, and I think a lot of these guys that we talked about as the ex-head coaches that could fill the role, they're consultants or analysts or whatever rule it is for teams vying for the playoffs or fighting in the playoffs right now. So those interviews would also not come for a while, but a good start here with a name that I think doesn't jump off the page, but would definitely be a good hire for the Bengals if they went this direction.
All right, off the bench. We got 12 minutes. All right, fine, Jacob. Let's talk college football.
Let's go!
By the way, you see that? So, Ohio State and Texas on Friday. There's legitimate talk about the weather that's heading into Dallas, and we know how bad winters could be in Dallas. There are legitimate talks and worry about this game playing and starting on time and actually kicking off in Dallas on Friday. I don't put much into that. They're going to figure it out. Right?
They have to. Certainly, they have to. It's an indoor stadium. Play the game.
Get some curtains. Call it a day. Let's go, Jerry. Come on.
I don't understand how weather has impacts on indoor stadiums. I mean, I get roads. I understand why. Roads are a problem. Travel's a problem. You're putting fans and players and everyone at risk getting to the stadium. Leave early? I don't know. Am I being insensitive here? This is the college football playoff semifinal. You have a dome. You're in Dallas, Texas. It's not going to be that bad.
Yeah, college football. You want to be the pros? Look, Roger, you look at the NFL, they make their fans go dig their own seats out when it's negative 25 in blizzard-like conditions. The NFL, college football. You want to be the NFL? You want to be professional sports? Welcome to the big leagues. Tell your fans, find any way necessary to get there, and let's get this show rolling. That's what they do in the NFL. You want to pretend to be professional sports? Be a professional. Tell your fans, risk your life to come watch our product. That's what's going to happen on Friday. If fans could stand out in negative 30-degree temps in Kansas City to watch a playoff game against a bad Dolphins team, all right, then I'm pretty sure fans could find a way to get to a covered dome in Jerry's world to watch the playoffs on Friday.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think if weather's delaying a football game at any point in time, if it's not lightning or a tornado or some other kind of natural disaster, I think it's a problem. The foundation of this game that we play is that we play in any weather, and when you gotta do it, especially inside. It's inside. It's an indoor stadium. I just can't get that through my head that we're delaying an indoor game for weather.
Makes no sense. Let me ask you guys this. I talked with Jacob about it. I think the Thursday game, the Penn State Notre Dame, I really do wish, and we were talking about ratings, and I think Jacob brought up the point that it was an okay rated game, the Georgia Notre Dame game, but it wasn't the world's best. Obviously, you're starting a game at 4:00 on a weekday. I don't like the Thursday game. I know the NFL owns Saturday, but I do wish every once in a while they would like rework their schedules and help each other out a little bit. so we could have that Saturday just be an absolute banger of a day instead of spacing it out. Like I'm 100% okay with both being Friday or at least one being Friday and one being Saturday. But the Thursday game is just weird to me, man. It's hard to get up, and this has been an issue with college athletics for so long. They play the college basketball national championship at 9:45 on a Monday, and they play the college football national championship at probably like 10 p.m. on a Monday. And it's stuff like that. It's like I just want you to own the weekend once. I know the NFL does, but it's crazy to me.
Yeah, with the playoffs, they put them in a tough situation, having the game Thursday and Friday. NFL took the whole day Saturday by going 4-8 instead of going 1-3 or anything along those lines. Yeah, I think the NFL really wanted to stake their claim here. They weren't happy that the NCAA was playing their first round of the playoffs on NFL days, and I think this is kind of a way for them to say you can take Thursday and Friday. But I think it was important, like you said, after the ratings of that Sugar Bowl, that you absolutely have to play these games in prime time. The money's such a big aspect, and you absolutely have to play these games in prime time. The one thing
before we go,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. I know you wanted to bring up that point from Jason Fitz.
That's what I was going to bring up before we got done here. When we were talking to Jason Fitz, I asked him about the Ohio State and Michigan loss, and he immediately pointed to one of the other biggest rivalries in college football, the Iron Bowl, which I know pretty well. I went to Alabama, and Alabama and Auburn's a huge deal. It's absolutely right up there with Alabama and Michigan for the best rivalries in college football. But Jason Fitz made a great point. He said when Alabama loses to Auburn, they don't hang their head. They don't care. They try to win a national championship, and that's what matters most. And there's a perfect example of this. It actually happened just a few years ago in the 2017 national championship. Jalen Hurts and the Alabama Crimson Tide hoisted the trophy, won the game, and that came after losing to Auburn in the regular season. It sent Auburn to Atlanta when they inevitably lost to Georgia, and then Alabama got a chance to play in the playoff and win a national championship. And how did Jalen Hurts respond to this? He put on an Auburn jersey and walked around the facility with the trophy. So this is not, blowing smoke. This isn't telling lies. Other teams don't value rivalries over national championships. And we live in a new era of college football where you don't have to beat Michigan to win a national championship. In the past, you did. In the past, it was one and the same. I still value that game more than a national championship. I still value the rivalry, as I know a lot of fans do. But you can win a championship without beating Michigan, and I think it's going to take some time for me to come along to that. But if other teams can separate the two, maybe some point down the line, I can do the same. But if Ohio State wins a national championship this year, it'll be exciting that night. And then we'll have to figure out where we go from here, because I know a lot of other teams don't value the rivalry. I still think it's a lot different in Columbus. So I'm not saying Ryan Day is going to get fired. I do think there's a lot of pressure on him to win that game next year, but a trophy certainly does go a long way. And I'll put it up one more time. Other teams don't value rivalries over championships. It's championships over rivalries. I know it's different in Columbus. I know it's different for the game. That's what makes it great. But maybe in the new era of college football, we all, myself included, should change our mindset a little bit.
See, we say it's different in Columbus, but I don't think it is.
It's different for the people in Columbus. The fans.
The
lunatic fringe that happens to make up like 80% of the fan base.
Well, no, because some fans come out and say, well, hold on, the lunatic fringe, that's only a small percentage of the fan base. Like, we move that goalpost all the time. By the way, I want Ohio State to win a national title for a lot of reasons, but just so it could vindicate my take from a few months ago. That's all I care about. I'm not right often. I want to be right on this one. So it is what it is. Just go win the damn national. There's no team in the playoff that's left that is a more complete team than Ohio State at this point. Not even close. Not even close. And I told Elliot before the show today, when we knew Jason Fitz was going to come on, a well-respected football analyst, I said, Elliot, I'm going to ask him first and foremost, is Ohio State as good as they look? Because I'm surrounded by Ohio State fans all day, and they all tell me yes. I just needed someone outside my echo chamber to tell me yes. But now I'm all in on the Buckeyes, going to place a responsible wager on that 5.5 in the Texas game. That is disrespectful to the Buckeyes. Buckeyes overcoming practice. I love it.
I also bet on the Buckeyes, and I wanted Jason Fitz to just light into that rivalry. Nothing made me happier than saying Michigan's irrelevant. So that was very, very funny. Who do you guys like? I'm sure we'll talk about it on Thursday, Friday. Who do you guys like in that Penn State game, real quick? Because I think I'm loving Penn State.
I am too.
when these by the way, who is the better quarterback? It's
Penn
Drew
State
Aller,
by a
correct?
mile.
Penn State.
Yeah.
So when you have teams that are equal, and I think both teams are very similar to one another, I'm always going to lean to the team that has the better quarterback. And I feel like I've seen more of Penn State, and I haven't seen a lot about Penn State that I like. That's why I'm hesitant to take Penn State. But I like Penn State in this one. But it is wild. Marcus Freeman and James Franklin, to see one of those two coaches punch their ticket to a national title game is going to be pretty wild on Thursday.
Have to know if Abdul
really-
Carter's playing before I make a pick on that one. It will be Notre Dame for me if Abdul Carter is out. But he's been posting a lot of Star Wars pictures and videos this week of Darth Vader in the hyperbaric chamber when he does his fast healing before he mauls all those women and children. So hopefully that's a sign that he's planning to heal quickly and come out and maul Notre Dame this weekend.
All right, well, I think we're out of time. By the way, we will have tomorrow Michael Jr. on Notre Dame.
Splendid.
Alum. So we got to,
And
I
Keegan,
love Marcus.
and Keegan
Freeman. I
Dickinson.
love Notre
And
Dame.
Keegan.
Yeah. So, but talking more playoffs tomorrow. But yes, in the Bearcats, plenty to talk about there. And then I guess, the Bengals, we got to keep. They've really let us down. The Bengals have let us down.
Yeah.
Tomorrow's
to
show
say the
is
least.
the Bengals and T. Higgins.
Maybe they fire someone else, and we can lead it off with that.
Were
All
you
right,
guys
guys,
shocked?
have a good
Actually,
rest
last thing, real quick.
You're good.
Were you guys shocked that Zach Taylor came out and said he was the one doing the firing?
No, because I think this is a very easy way for the front office to say if your next hires don't work, you're gone with them. I think if the front office is making coaching staff moves, I saw some people jumping to the conclusion that Mike Brown or Duke Tobin or whoever that is sat down and said, Zach, you're gone or they're gone. I do not think that was the case. I do not think that's how the conversation went. I do think they put the onus on Zach Taylor, and they said, if you want to keep these guys and they fail next year, you are gone with them. If you want to reset and maybe extend your own life a little bit and roll the dice on a new coach at some of these positions, you have the chance to do that as well, just putting that onus on him. And I think he took the gamble to extend his own life, because if you kept Lou and it went poorly, then that's a pretty easy, wipe the hands, get them all out of here, clean house. And if you change DC, maybe you can argue that, it's a work in progress and buy a little bit more time. So I think it was really more of that than anything else. They gave the chance to Zach Taylor, and he seized the opportunity for himself.
Yeah, sometimes they're just giving you a little bit of leash. All right, so it's up to you what you do with that leash, of course. There you go. But that wraps it up today. We'll do it again tomorrow. Until tomorrow, this has been Off the Bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers.